People think regret comes from bad decisions. They're wrong. The deepest regret comes from doing the right thing, when it costs you everything you were. I didn't cheat. I didn't steal. I didn't betray anyone for pleasure or gain. I told the truth. And that single moment split my life into before and after. Before, I had a life that worked. Not perfect. Not exciting. But solid. People trusted me. Relied on me. Saw me as someone stable, predictable, safe. I had routines. Plans. A future that made sense if you didn't look too closely. After, everything became quiet. Empty. Unrecognizable. The night it happened, I didn't feel heroic. I didn't feel brave. I felt sick. Physically sick. Like my body already knew the cost before my mind was ready to accept it. I remember standing in that room, listening to my own heartbeat, thinking, if I stay silent, nothing changes. If I speak, nothing survives. That's what no one tells you about moral choices. Sometimes there is no good outcome, only a version of yourself you can still look at in the mirror. I spoke anyway. The words came out calmer than I expected. Measured. Controlled. Almost polite. As if politeness could soften the impact of truth. The silence afterward was unbearable. Not explosive. Not dramatic. Just a vacuum. The kind of silence that tells you something has permanently shifted and will never return to its original place. People looked at me differently after that. Not with anger at first. With confusion. Then distance. Then something colder. Disappointment. I went home that night and sat on the edge of my bed without turning on the lights. I didn't cry. I didn't panic. I just sat there, replaying the moment over and over, wondering if there had been another way. There wasn't. That's what hurt the most. In the days that followed, consequences arrived quietly. Conversations became shorter. Invitations stopped coming. Decisions were made without me. I wasn't confronted, I was phased out. It's strange how quickly you can become optional. People didn't yell at me. They didn't accuse me. That would have been easier. Instead, they acted like I had broken some unspoken rule, like I had violated the agreement that says we protect the system, not the truth. I started doubting myself. Was I naive? Was I selfish? Was I confusing honesty with righteousness? At night, I argued with myself endlessly. If I had stayed quiet, everyone would have been fine. Including me. Instead, I chose a truth that didn't need me anymore once it was spoken. I lost my role first. Then my place. Then, slowly, my identity. People don't realize how much of who you are is reflected back to you by others. When that reflection disappears, you start feeling unreal, like a ghost haunting your own life. I kept waiting for the moment when it would feel worth it. For the moral victory to arrive. For peace. For relief. It didn't. What arrived instead was isolation. I was alone more often. Not physically, emotionally. Conversations felt careful, filtered. I could sense what people didn't say around me. The tension. The unspoken discomfort. Truth makes people nervous. Especially when it reminds them of compromises they're still making. I started asking myself a terrifying question: did I destroy my life, for nothing? Weeks turned into months. The structure of my days collapsed. Not dramatically, subtly. Without purpose, time stretches in uncomfortable ways. Mornings felt heavier. Evenings longer. I replayed alternate versions of that moment constantly. Versions where I stayed silent. Versions where I lied just enough. Versions where I waited. Every version had a future. The one I chose had consequences. I didn't regret being honest. I regretted underestimating the price. That was the beginning of my breakdown, not a screaming collapse, but a slow erosion. Confidence first. Then belonging. Then the sense that my life was still moving forward. I started feeling like I was standing still while everyone else continued on paths I was no longer allowed to walk. And somewhere in that stillness, a darker thought appeared: if this is the cost of doing the right thing, what happens next? After the truth came out, my life didn't collapse. It thinned. That's the word that fits best. Everything became lighter, weaker, less defined. Like a photograph left too long in the sun. I still woke up every morning. I still went where I was expected to go. I still answered messages. But something essential had been removed, the sense that I belonged anywhere. People stopped asking my opinion. Not abruptly. Gradually. They started finishing conversations without waiting for my response. Plans were discussed in front of me as if I were furniture. Present, but irrelevant. At first, I told myself I was imagining it. That I was being sensitive. That this was the price of integrity and I just needed time to adjust. But the body knows before the mind admits it. I started waking up exhausted no matter how much I slept. My chest felt tight for no clear reason. I lost interest in things that used to anchor me. Music became noise. Food became fuel. Days became something to endure rather than experience. I was breaking down, quietly, politely, without disturbing anyone. There's a special kind of loneliness that comes from being morally isolated. Not abandoned because you did something wrong, but distanced because you refused to participate in something unspoken and convenient. No one accused me directly. No one said, "You shouldn't have said anything." They didn't have to. Their silence did that for them. I began replaying the moment of my choice with cruel precision. Not just what I said, but how I said it. My tone. My timing. My expression. I punished myself for every imagined flaw. Maybe if I had waited. Maybe if I had softened it. Maybe if I had let someone else speak first. That's how regret works. It convinces you that there was a version of reality where you could have kept your integrity and your life intact. There wasn't. I started withdrawing, not out of spite, but self-preservation. When you realize your presence creates tension, you learn how to disappear inside a room. You stop volunteering information. You stop asking questions that might lead to honesty. You learn how to be agreeable again. Ironically, I became exactly what the system prefers: compliant, quiet, predictable. But now it was too late. The trust one had disrupted never returned. Even when people were polite, something invisible stood between us. An awareness that I was capable of saying the thing no one wanted said. That kind of person is tolerated, not embraced. I began to understand something deeply unsettling: society doesn't reward truth. It rewards consistency. And I had broken consistency. At night, I lay awake thinking about who I used to be before that moment. Not better. Just simpler. less aware, less awake. Ignorance isn't bliss. It's insulation. Once it's gone, you feel everything. I tried to rebuild. I really did. I took on new responsibilities. I forced enthusiasm. I told myself meaning would follow action. It didn't. Instead, I felt hollow, like I was acting out a life that no longer believed in me. That's when the thoughts started to get darker. Not suicidal. Not dramatic. Just erasing. I imagined what it would be like to step away entirely. To leave the environment where my choice had defined me. To exist somewhere my past didn't arrive before I did. At first, it scared me. Then it comforted me. I started questioning the entire foundation of my identity. Had I been living authentically before, or just conveniently? Was my good life actually good, or just socially approved? These questions don't come gently. They tear at you in quiet moments. In empty rooms. In conversations that feel like performances. The worst part wasn't losing status or connection. It was losing momentum. Life felt paused. Like I was stuck on the wrong side of a decision with no clear path forward. Too honest to return. Too exhausted to fight. I watched people who stayed silent continue to thrive. Promotions. Stability. Respect. They weren't bad people. They were practical ones. And that's when the bitterness arrived. Not loud. Not explosive. Just a quiet resentment toward a world where doing the right thing felt like self-sabotage. I hated that thought. I hated myself for having it. But honesty had already ruined me once. Lying to myself now felt pointless. There was a moment, small, almost forgettable, when someone I trusted said, "You should have thought about the consequences." I nodded. What I didn't say was that I had thought about them. I just didn't expect them to be this complete. That was the moment I realized something irreversible had happened. I couldn't go back to who I was. And I couldn't stay where I was either. Something had to give. And for the first time since telling the truth, I understood this wasn't just about that one decision anymore. It was about whether I was willing to rebuild my entire life around the person that decision revealed. The decision to leave didn't arrive with clarity. It arrived with fatigue. Not the kind that sleep fixes. The kind that comes from holding your breath emotionally for too long. From constantly explaining yourself inside your own head while the world moves on without waiting. I didn't announce anything. I didn't confront anyone. I simply stopped trying to fit back into a life that no longer had a place for me. Leaving wasn't dramatic. It rarely is. It was administrative. Practical. A series of small choices that added up to something irreversible. I packed what mattered. Which, I discovered, wasn't much. I didn't run away from people. I ran away from a version of myself that existed only in reaction to others. The first weeks after I left felt like floating. No direction. No resistance. Just movement without friction. It was unsettling at first. When you've lived your entire life defined by responsibility, freedom feels suspicious. I expected relief. What I got instead was grief. Grief for the life I could have had if the world had rewarded truth differently. Grief for relationships that couldn't survive honesty. Grief for a version of myself that believed doing the right thing would eventually feel right. It didn't. But something else happened slowly. Without the constant pressure to justify my choice, my thoughts became clearer. My emotions less reactive. I stopped replaying that moment obsessively. I stopped trying to convince an imaginary audience that I was right. I realized something uncomfortable. I hadn't told the truth to change the world. I told it because I couldn't live with myself if I didn't. That distinction matters. Because it means the value of that choice was never supposed to be external. It was internal. Private. Personal. I started rebuilding my life around that idea. Not around approval. Not around recognition. But around alignment. Days became quieter. Slower. I learned what it meant to exist without constantly monitoring how I was perceived. I learned that anonymity can be healing when identity has become a battleground. There were moments of doubt. Many of them. Nights where loneliness pressed so hard it felt physical. Times when I wondered if integrity was just a story we tell ourselves to justify self-inflicted loss. But even in those moments, something inside me stayed intact. I could look at myself honestly. That might not sound like much. But when you've lived inside compromise for too long, it's everything. I still think about the people I lost. About how my absence probably became just another detail in their lives. A chapter closed without explanation. Sometimes I wish I had found a gentler way. A compromise that didn't cost me everything. But then I remember how it felt to wake up every day pretending not to know what I knew. And I understand. This isn't a story about bravery. It's a story about limits. About the moment you realize that preserving your life as it is will eventually destroy you. About choosing a future that hurts less, even if it looks worse from the outside. If you're listening to this and you're standing at a similar crossroads, here's what I learned the hard way: doing the right thing doesn't guarantee a better life. It guarantees a more honest one. And honesty comes with a cost most people aren't prepared to pay. But living without it costs you something far more dangerous. Yourself. I didn't win. I didn't come out stronger. I didn't find happiness waiting on the other side. What I found was ownership. This life, imperfect, quieter, smaller, is mine. No one applauds it. No one validates it. No one needs to. Because for the first time, when I wake up, I don't have to explain my existence to myself. And after everything I lost, that is enough.